Guest host Jamison West from ConnectStrat is here to talk about the cloud solution recipe for cyberspace success and news from NetApp, RapidFire Tools, and Tech Data, plus a special guest interview with Forrester's Jay McBain on the impact of coronavirus on the channel. It's ChannelPro Weekly, episode 144, The Mustache Crisis. Hello, welcome to ChannelPro Weekly, episode 144. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor, online director, and host of this fine program for you. And who do I mean by you? Well, you are the VARs, you are the integrators, you are the IMSPs, you're the MSSPs, you're the ISCCSC, CTPDESs. So, like, if your job has a lot of acronyms and stuff in it, you are probably in the right place. And we're really glad you're here. We really, really are. Joining me this week and every week is our executive editor, the man who makes black sport coats look like it's fashionable every single day, Rich Freeman.
And thank goodness it's finally time to start recording another episode of the podcast, Matt, because I was just trying to figure out what day is it exactly, and maybe one of you guys can tell me.
Yeah, well, no one really knows anymore because we're all like buried into our houses, not communicating with the outside world in any kind of physical sense. Of course, if you're listening to this long after the fact, we are still right in the midst of the coronavirus, what I was going to say scandal. It's not a scandal, pandemic or whatever you want to call it. It is kind of a scandal in some ways too. But yeah, we're right in the middle of that. I know in my lovely state of Illinois, we just got shelter in place orders again for another month, which some people are actually fighting. So that's kind of interesting. But we're not alone. See, we're all buried in our houses and we're trying to stay safe, but we're still getting together. And here with us as guest host today, we're super excited to have him on. He is the strategic coach of ConnectStrat, as well as CEO of Smileback and TimeZest, Jamison West. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. And I got out of the house, got into a bar today, so it kind of in the morning, so it might not be appropriate, but whatever. It's just what I have to do to keep things interesting.
Well, these days, most people have no sense of time, so it's always time to go to the bar.
5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, I see the bar is pretty empty, though. There's no bartenders. Are you like
social
helping
distancing.
yourself? Yes. That's awesome. So Jamison, that's a long list of titles and a long list of companies. We are all dying to know a little bit more about you and what you do.
Yeah, so I've been around the channel for a very long time, known Rich for many years. I started my IT services company in 1995 in Seattle, grew it, bought a few other companies and grew it pretty well, sold in early 2016 and then got out of Dodge, the rain and the traffic after spending my whole life up there. And now I live in sunny Las Vegas. We hit 99 yesterday. Almost, it would have been the first time we hit 100 in April in history, but we missed it by 1 degree, but it was a little warm. So three things are going on. I've been involved with Smileback from the early days. So we're a customer satisfaction and NPS, integrated to most of the PSA platforms out there. Just helping customers helping MSPs understand customer sentiment and feedback. And so I've been doing that for quite a while. Fun work. Also co-founded about a year ago a company called TimeZest, scheduling for IT services companies. So all the phone calls and emails that happen to get people's schedules pain in the butt. So it was really nice to have a big hairy problem to solve, and that's been a lot of fun. And then really the last couple of years I've been, in my business, I used a system called Scaling Up, Rockefeller Habits, Vern Harnish, to run the business. But I kind of discovered over the last few years, I've migrated my companies over to the EOS. I began doing that for other clients. So I've been really coaching leadership teams, mostly in the IT services channel, and finally worked with several other coaches to form ConnectStrat. And it's been a really interesting year. And, to really launch a consulting company like that at the beginning of coronavirus has been interesting. We weren't sure what was going to happen. And to the credit of the channel and what's going on, I just, nobody misstepped. Everybody's stuck with they're keeping you're in the weeds all day long, but people are getting above the weeds and getting strategic and maintaining their big quarterly meetings. It's been a lot of fun to watch people get creative and be smart about how to handle this whole mess.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's good. It's actually good to hear, you know, because one of the temptations, especially when you're sort of heading into a recession, there's this idea, I've got to conserve cash any way I can. And so I'm going to cut that consulting contract. And this is actually the time when you really need to be working with an efficiency consultant and getting your business as efficient as it can be to set yourself up to get through the recession. So it's encouraging to hear that people understand that, and they're willing to make that investment, even if they're cutting back elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just getting through it. It is getting through, absolutely. But a bigger, I mean, I've told all my clients this, and I say it all the time. You go back and look at the 2007, 2008 in Las Vegas. Wealth is made and lost in economic upheaval, right? I mean, you could buy houses, 10 for 1 in 2009 in Las Vegas. A lot of people made a lot of money, right? And so this idea, people leveraging PPP and all these other programs out there to like really bolster and get their foundation strong, they're going to come out of this stronger than they entered it if they play their cards right. So it's been really kind of fun to watch people get creative and invest and solve their problems. It's a great time to be doing that. So.
And one of the really just interesting things, the many interesting aspects of this time we find ourselves in, is that there are these enormous unanticipated challenges, and also enormous unanticipated opportunities that have come up, and kind of sorting through that, figuring out what you need to do to avoid one and take advantage of the other. It's just a really interesting time to be in this business.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to say a few things quickly about the two products that you mentioned there for folks who might be new to them. So Smileback, it's a system basically that allows you to automatically collect feedback from end users. So you close a ticket, an email, and you can correct me if I get the process wrong, but a ticket closes, an email goes out to the end user, and they can click the green happy face, this went well, the yellow, it went okay, the red, it didn't go well. And if you get the red, a notification from the customer, they're not happy with the way things went, you can get an alert and follow up and see what happened. So really kind of smart and interesting product for MSPs who want to keep their finger on the pulse of customer satisfaction on an ongoing basis. And I will say quickly that that product was on our annual Vendors on the Vanguard list a few years back. So once a year, we produce a list here at ChannelPro of solutions that our readers should know about, but maybe don't, newer companies, underappreciated products. Smileback was on that list a few years back. TimeZest, which is brand new. I remember you explaining it to me at a conference. We ran into each other, and you just gave me 3 words that just crystallize it. You said it's Calendly for ConnectWise.
Yeah.
And for anyone who knows what Calendly is, right? It's like the self-serve scheduling. If somebody wants to book time with me, I'm on a calendar, you go into my Calendly, you can see when I'm available and so on. You can imagine a customer being able to do that with their MSP when they need to have a tech come out, and all of the sort of trouble, hassle that would save. That's what TimeZest is about. And I you know what, it's April 30th as we record this here, which, May 1st is tomorrow. May 1st is when officially our new Vendors on the Vanguard list comes out. And, we're not really disclosing who's on the list, but you might want to keep an eye on that, Mr. TimeZest.
Well, it might be a nice 50th birthday present for me tomorrow then.
Oh, you're turning 50 tomorrow, really?
Tomorrow. How about that? That'd be nice.
Well, and you know what's funny? But when this actually goes live, it'll be tomorrow. So it's tomorrow today. Happy birthday!
Thank you very much. First day of the second half of my life.
So what is a Jamison West birthday plans? What are you gonna do?
Well, they've changed. So the original plan, I was going to be at a conference in Cape Town, South Africa this last week. I'm part of EO, and it was the Global Leadership Conference. It's been obviously canceled. And tomorrow, my wife and I are heading off on safari in Botswana. Not so much. So instead, we're getting a nice steak dinner I think my son's going to go pick it up from a local restaurant. But we're going to act like we have a nice restaurant. So I actually had reservations in hope, that our stay-at-home order would lift tomorrow. It's also here in Nevada been extended apparently till roughly the end of the month. We'll see what happens. Everything seems a little confused right now, but enjoy the family and the weather. And I think that's my plan.
Yeah. So, this has affected all of our lives. In what ways has it affected yours? Like, what are you doing these days that you may not have been doing before?
So a couple things. I just realized how much you kind of count your blessings, right? So, really fortunate to be in a situation where we're not massively negatively impacted from a revenue and income perspective, and I'm really thankful for that. Also thankful that we have a backyard and a pool, and I'm living here and not in that cold, snowy place that I don't want to be, or a small apartment. I have a friend in Mumbai, or an employee, I should say, in Mumbai, who's just I'm like, I don't know, I could do that. I already had work from home. I work from home. My staff for Smilebacks primarily in Berlin, and then in the Ukraine and Canada. They're all over the world. And TimeZest, we're very virtual as well. The big change for me is I'm used to being on a plane pretty constantly, at least a couple times a month. And I'm doing all day, strategic sessions with my clients, with leadership teams, and we're doing it on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. It's actually been very effective. I also find, which is really interesting, a lot of people knew intrinsically and had read studies that productivity it would actually be just, working from home is something that we know. There's been a lot of studies that shown that we can be very productive. There's some individuals who don't do it well, but I've talked to so many people who said, wow, I didn't think I would be working so much more. They just find themselves sitting down and 10 hours later getting up and going, what just happened? And I find myself doing that too. I'm just really productive and efficient, and then also not wasting my time traveling. I'm here seeing the family and hanging out in the backyard and kind of fit it all in. It's great.
It's interesting. People, a lot of times, especially employers, think that work at home means less productive. Although I'm in your boat. I've also been working from home now for pretty much the better part of a decade. And I do remember when I was in a former company and we had an office, and the office was like an hour and 20 minutes from where I lived. And we would go to the office, and I got to tell you how much less you get done sometimes going to an office, because you get there and we got to play the foosball game, and then we got to take an hour lunch. And when people are home, a lot of times you're right. You sit down and time just kind of flies by, and you can be amazed how much more productive people can be.
Yeah, it's amazing. Until a couple years out in this automated driving, and you can just sit in your Tesla and have it take you to work with your laptop instead of a steering wheel. Until those days come, that is a lot of waste. Seattle was nuts. You drive across town and it was an hour and a half. No, not going anywhere. So you put that in perspective, it's 15 hours on the road. It's like that. I can do so much.
Only a crazy person would live in Seattle.
Well, or would live in Seattle and not work from home anyway. As we're talking about this, I remember once upon a time, way back when, I used to work at Microsoft, and I lived 12 miles away from campus, and commuting in the morning, during rush hour, took me at least 45 minutes to cover that 12 miles. And and it was just as bad getting home. So yeah, it is. Traffic here is kind of nuts.
It is.
So do you think, I know there are a lot of MSPs who are already hearing from their customers, who have had this great discovery, hey, actually, remote work does work. I don't have to worry about not being able to see my people working. They are actually getting stuff done. To what extent do you expect knowledge work, if you will, to just be permanently different after this, in terms of how much time people spend at home versus the office, and what that winds up meaning for VARs and MSPs?
Well, I think it's going to be significant. I wouldn't be investing in commercial real estate. It's we're doing it at Smileback. I'm talking to multiple clients and companies who are like, I always thought this might work. I was a little worried from a culture perspective, but we figured out how to all look at each other while we're connected. We're feeling good about this. We're still in the same town. We can get together at a bar for happy hour, but we don't have to start from the office. Why go back? Look at how much money. So if they've spent the last, we go another month here, they're going to look back on the last 2 or 3 months and say, wow, we were no less productive, maybe more productive and more efficient. And I can cut my X dollars per month because it's not just the lease. I mean, there's a lot more cost to owning an office than the lease. We're already talking about subletting some of our space at Smileback when we come out of this, because people are like, well, this is working. So I suspect it's going to be significant. I have already talked to multiple MSPs where, the first thing that stopped wasn't the MRR. It was the project work, right? Like everybody's like, stop. But what's come back pretty quickly, cloud migrations. People are like, we might not be going back to this office where our server room is, right? So Rich, I've been talking about this for 7-8 years, but maybe I was just way ahead of myself. But now it's like, this is almost the impetus where, if we're going to work remotely, it's like this needs to work. This needs to be a very cloud focused. People are dealing with, there's this massive influx of tickets, 2 to 3x in tickets to all these MSPs when coronavirus hit, to help people set up their VPNs and stuff and work from home. And which also was immediately like, why are we using VPNs? Like, what's the better process to connect from home? And so these cloud projects I'm starting to see MSPs implement like better. It's all about cloud and security, cloud and security, cloud and security. And I think that's our future. And we're kind of forcing the issue. And I think that's been really positive. I suspect this is going to be like 50% of people go back to work. They kind of have to, and a very large percentage, this is our new way of life, and it's going to be positive.
And that's pretty much my sort of sense of things too. I totally agree with that. I've had the exact same thought about this is a terrible time to be in the commercial real estate business, because we're in a recession. It's only getting deeper before it starts to get better. People are looking for ways to save money, and here something has just fallen in their lap. You are spending too much on your lease and all the other associated expenses with the office. So I don't see offices going away altogether. But I see them getting smaller. I see more of these kind of temporary desk assignment, hoteling kind of arrangements, and people having much, much more flexibility to come into the office some days, work from home other days, or spend part of the day at home, part of the day in the office. I think there's going to be a ton of that. And it is fascinating. Yesterday, I was not on the conference call that Microsoft did yesterday when they announced their quarterly numbers, but apparently Satya Nadella said that Microsoft has seen roughly 2 years worth of cloud transformation in 2 months. That the progress that should have taken 2 years has happened just in that 2-month kind of period, because everybody had to do it at once. And I've very much had that sort of thought too, where a lot of what we're seeing happen right now is stuff that you certainly anticipated years ago. I probably could have projected, 3 years from now, this is how the world's going to look. And instead of, 3 years, it's like 3 weeks. All of a sudden it has to happen. And so it happens. And now here we are, way ahead of the curve, essentially, and living in that world that we knew was going to come, but thought it was going to come much later.
Yeah, I think there's been, and it's the MSPs and IT service providers who've kind of been on that bandwagon for a while, and you can just see that the ease with which they've made this transition is a whole lot different than folks that have really been focused on traditional premise-based infrastructure, but the Band-Aid's being ripped off. So it's just, it is forcing the issue. It's very interesting to hear that kind of study from Microsoft. It makes sense.
Yeah. The other thing, and we might actually get into this a little bit later in the show, but some of the numbers that they shared in terms of usage of their Teams product in particular were kind of astonishing. There was one day in April, apparently, where they had over 200 million people participating in Teams meetings, and it was something like more than 4.1 billion minutes of meeting time just in one day. Which is just unbelievable. And they said they've got 75 million active Teams users now worldwide. And I didn't get a chance to go back and look because I just saw this data like a half an hour ago. But I seem to remember that in something like the September, October timeframe last year, they made a big deal of the fact that they had hit 20 million. And it took them a while to get to 20 million. And here we are, whatever, 7-ish months later, and they're at 75, and I'm sure it's still growing.
I'm pretty, I look at Microsoft, it's kind of micro, I love what they're doing all the time. I bleed blue a little bit, but it's they're a little monolithic. It's like steering the Titanic to do anything. The speed at which they released Teams for free, like the way that they kind of came out and enabled that was very impressive to me. I mean, for an organization that size to kind of message and move teams the way, it's the right response. So it's interesting to hear.
Yeah. Well, and also look at the bright side. If more people work from home, maybe commercial toilet paper makers can stop making those gigantic rolls for company bathrooms and like start making normal size rolls, so we can actually get toilet paper at the store again. Wouldn't that be nice?
That'd be wonderful.
Because if people will need more toilet paper at home, because their butt's going to be at home more than at the office. All right. Well, that's newsworthy right there, Rich. I expect a full press release on corporate toilet paper makers on the site soon. Well, anyway, Jamison, great to have you here with us. You're going to be guest hosting with us here for the whole show, which is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to roll through some news. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of great insights on some of these. So we're going to, as you said, steer the Titanic. We're going to turn our ship right towards the news. First story is about NetApp, who has they bought something. What did they buy?
They bought CloudJumper, and this is actually a perfect segue. We just sort of set this story up perfectly. So NetApp, everybody hears NetApp, they immediately think storage. We've known this vendor for many years, a huge presence in storage, and particularly storage hardware. But like everybody else, NetApp understood that more and more of IT is moving into the cloud. It doesn't mean storage hardware goes away, but you don't necessarily want to bet your business on that. So they've been really aggressive about developing a cloud storage strategy, and they have a whole bunch of products that you can use with Microsoft Azure and AWS and Google to store data in sophisticated ways. Last May, I believe it was, May 2019, they introduced a product together with Microsoft called Azure NetApp Files, which is just a file storage space in Azure, but it's what's known as a first-party solution. It's not a solution you run on top of Azure. It's actually an Azure service built into the platform. So they've been very serious about cloud. They've been very serious about Microsoft and Azure, and they've gotten even more serious about all of that stuff now because they just went out and for an undisclosed amount of money purchased CloudJumper. CloudJumper is a very big name in workspace as a service, and very big in helping MSPs and end users embrace Azure, embrace in particular Windows Virtual Desktop, the Windows VDI solution that we've been talking about on and off again here on the podcast. And so NetApp saw an opportunity. They already knew that CloudJumper solution made a lot of use of Azure NetApp Files. So they were familiar with this company, and what they've done now, basically, they've gone out and acquired it, and they've rebranded the CloudJumper product as NetApp Virtual Desktop Service, VDS, and they're going to bundle that product together with Azure Net Files, or if you're an AWS and Google person, you can use their NetApp Cloud Volumes product instead. But you're going to be able to take a Windows Virtual Desktop license, combine it with a NetApp Cloud Storage product, combine it with a NetApp Cloud Backup product. They make cloud backup for software as a service, especially Office 365 and Salesforce, and pull all that together into what NetApp is calling a modern workplace solution, a bundled offering that covers a number of different closely associated needs for companies that are migrating into the cloud. And I will quickly point out that, 3 weeks ago, we were talking about an announcement from Zix, which is best known, originally known as an email security and archiving company, and they just within a few weeks of now, introduced this, they called it a modern workplace solution, and it combines their security and archiving products with Office 365 licenses via AppRiver, the cloud distributor that Zix bought about a year plus ago. And the distributors have been talking about these kind of bundled modern workplace kind of solutions too. This is very much the vision where a lot of companies are going right now, is pull together a lot of the things that customers are going to need into one package that they can pay for potentially at one price on a subscription basis, and roll that out to all your customers.
Now we've talked about CloudJumper several times on episodes past. I believe we also interviewed someone from CloudJumper at one point. Isn't that correct?
We may have there may have been a recorded segment with JD Helms, the president of that company, who is sticking with NetApp, by the way, and he's now going to be the vice president in charge of their modern workplace group. But
episode 99. You had an interview
okay.
with JD Helms about that. So, and that was kind of talking about Windows VDI, and so they're moving over into NetApp, correct?
Who's moving over to NetApp?
The person you just said, JD.
Oh,
Helms.
JD. Yeah, he's got a sweet new gig. In fact, he's the vice president in charge of that whole modern workplace initiative at NetApp. So he retains ownership of the CloudJumper product that has now become NetApp Virtual Desktop Service, but he's also in charge of I think it was the SaaS backup product and a file caching system, a number of other NetApp products, and so he's got an interesting job now.
And what's the impact on those who might have been using CloudJumper in the past? Is this a seamless kind of transition or change, or how is that working?
Yeah, so from the standpoint of an existing CloudJumper user, as it was explained to me, the only difference is you logged into the system yesterday and there was a different logo there. I mean, functionally it's the exact same product. Some of the branding has changed a little bit. Now the NetApp folks said, the product does exactly what it did before, but you as a partner are better off because now you've got more stuff that you can sell. You have access to, so everybody who is in CloudJumper's partner program has just been moved straight over to the NetApp Cloud First partner program. So now you're part of this bigger partner program with more products to sell. NetApp says the margins you're going to be able to make on some of the stuff you were already selling are going to be better inside Cloud First. So their message is nothing has changed immediately from a functional standpoint. You've got more that you can sell now. And over time, you're going to be gaining functionality. So there's going to be, there is, as I understand it, integration today between what used to be the CloudJumper product and Azure NetApp files, but there's going to be full-blown integration across those products within the next 90 days or so. And then they've got they didn't get into details with me, but they've got a pretty substantial roadmap of additional integrations that they want to add. They want to grow this modern workplace offering and integrate the Microsoft WVD and AWS Google equivalents with other NetApp products on an ongoing basis. They've got more to come.
Okay, so another acquisition, another merger, another small company absorbed into another company. Jamison, we've seen that a lot lately. What do you think?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. The interesting, from an MSP perspective, as you try to get more operationally mature, this idea, as you start shifting to the cloud, and this is particularly difficult for MSPs who had things on premise and they're dealing with apps and they're primarily local storage, and they're starting to look at mitigating the risk and proliferation of apps as they move into the cloud. It's more vendors, it's more headache, it's more to manage, it's much more difficult to connect and integrate systems. So these kinds of plays just make a ton of sense, because if I can have one throat to choke in terms of a vendor with a robust platform that covers the majority of my needs, we're just going to keep seeing this stuff happen, and it's all going to be cloud focused, and it makes a ton of sense. We were always focused at Arterian, at my MSP in Seattle. We were focused on how do we get our clients into how do we mitigate or minimize the number of platforms we need to deliver the maximum value. Now I've got 2 SaaS apps, right? And the problem is, as you look around, even in one of my small SaaS app companies, we look at, it's a list of like 60 SaaS apps we use to run our little company. And that becomes very, very difficult when you're managing that on behalf of 100 clients, right? So that's where these things start to make massive amounts of sense.
Yeah, and we'll post a link to this story, and actually every news story that we talk about, if you go to the show page for episode 144 at channelpronetwork.com, you'll find these, and we're just kind of touching on some of the high-level overview here, but if you want to go and read these, there's a lot more detail. I want to ask one question, because we've been talking a lot about VDI over the last year in particular, and there's been a lot of interest in VDI. I have to imagine with the whole coronavirus pandemic and a huge shift to work at home, the interest in virtual desktop has got to be far more than what it even was 3 months ago. How rapid do you think the virtual desktop model is going to be over the next 6 months?
Well, I think it's going to be massive. Everybody it's exactly a response that we'd expect right now at this time, right? I need to work from home. I need my environment to look and feel like it did when I was sitting in the office. I need security to work the way it did when I was sitting in the office. And VDI is the most obvious way to quickly deliver on that promise. So that makes a ton of sense. I still believe over a very long haul that VDI will be interesting to see what the long-term play on VDI is, and how much things move more to SaaS model from a VDI, from a virtual desktop model as device. I kind of believe that devices long term, or how we attach to them and leverage them, is going to continue to shift to more SaaS. But VDI is the clear interim step, and we're in the midst of that right now. It's also what you can do quickly, because I can move you to a VDI solution without changing anything in the back end infrastructure, right? And in terms of the apps I'm accessing, so I can deliver an experience to my employees or clients that doesn't change.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the easiest and quickest right solution to the current situation. So very, very interesting stuff. Also interesting stuff, Rich, is RapidFire Tools. It seems like they never miss an opportunity to put a must-have analysis or management tool out at the right time, and they've got a new one for MSPs. What is it, Rich?
Yeah, so this is another kind of timely announcement here from the RapidFire Tools folks. And people in our audience are probably most familiar with RapidFire Tools from their Network Detective product. That was their first sort of big hit product. And it's a security assessment. It actually assesses a number of different things, but it's an assessment tool that MSPs can use to study a network environment, a security environment, produce reports that the MSP can use or present to the customer, and kind of showing them here's where things are going well, things maybe need some improvement. They saw an opportunity. Obviously, the average RapidFire Tools Network Detective user right now is an MSP who is using it to assess an office environment and all of the sort of corporate PCs in that office environment. And generally speaking, if some business customer is your client as an MSP, within a few months of onboarding that client, you've probably gotten those corporate PCs into a reasonably good kind of shape from a security posture in particular. But then what happened just within the last couple of months or so is all those corporate PCs are collecting dust back in the office. Everyone is doing their work from home. And a lot of those people are doing that work from a home PC. The same PC the kids use to play games at night is now being used to, develop intellectual property and run accounting spreadsheets and so on and so forth. MSPs have very little visibility in most cases into those devices, what's on those devices, how secure they are. It's not as easy as it might sound to get that visibility. You either have to remote into those devices one at a time, which is a nightmare, or you can try to install, say, like an RMN agent on those computers, but that's a problem too for a number of different reasons. First of all, there could be licensing implications in terms of the RMN system you're using. Second of all, customers don't necessarily, like end users, don't necessarily like having this monitoring app on their home PC. It's one thing if the PC I use at the office has monitoring software on it. That's not my PC. That belongs to the boss. But wait a minute, you want to put that on my PC at home and watch what I'm doing? That's going to create some pushback.
Well, they want to see how good their kids are at Fortnite, so they know how to go against them if they decide to play.
We need to be collecting metrics on this. Yeah, exactly. So there are a number of different reasons why it has been very challenging for MSPs to really get a handle on what their customers are working from these days. And so the RapidFire Tools folks took Network Detective and really by adding just a little bit of incremental intellectual property. This isn't a full-blown, entirely new module or product, but they're calling it their work from home solution. And it's like a version of Network Detective that you can use to begin to get that kind of visibility into these work from home devices that your customers are using right now. So what they've added really is two things. They've added a self-serve portal and some new reports. And so the idea, as I understand it, is you send an email out to all the end users you support. It's got a link in it. You ask everybody, please click that link. It takes them to the self-serve portal. The end user runs this Network Detective scan that collects a whole bunch of information about this home PC the person is working from, and then it feeds it into the Network Detective product, and that's where you use the new reports to take a look at that data. And the reports are basically like a report card. They give you a color-coded letter score that kind of show you device by device, how secure these products are right now. And then it's up to the MSP to act on that data. You could set a policy where anything that's got a C grade or worse, I am going to immediately do something about. When I'm done with that, I go back and I look for the Bs or something like that. How you act on the report today is very much a manual kind of process. Down the road, RapidFire Tools is looking to maybe build some automation into this, and they're still a little unsure of what the roadmap looks like for this work from home solution, but they would very much like to at least add some alerting capacity to it so that the system, today, the system can be configured to automatically rescan all of those endpoints once a week. Down the road, if that rescan discovers that a device that got an A grade last week got a B this week, or it was B last week and now it's C, maybe you get an alert saying, hey, there's been a degradation on this particular device, look into it. Or maybe, and this is a little bit more out there, but they're very intrigued by the idea that they might be able to allow an MSP to create a script and have the system, the work from home system, automatically run that script. So if Network Detective discovers that an endpoint device out there that has a firewall on it, that firewall has suddenly become disabled, then maybe it automatically runs the script and starts the firewall back up again and takes some of that manual effort out of the hands of technicians. But overall, it's like a low impact way to get a sense for the hardware that your end users are using from home right now. It doesn't involve installing anything on a PC, kind of touching that PC in a way that might make the owner of the device and your customer a little bit uncomfortable. And it's pulling together information that I know a lot of MSPs are very hungry for right now.
Yeah, so it's starting off with as a self-serve portal, but it sounds like the vision here, though, is that it's going to become something of an agent that gets installed that's scanning it weekly, right?
Well, there wouldn't be an agent required from that, but there is. I mean, it scans weekly now, but it does that remotely. You don't need to have an agent on the device.
How does it scan it remotely if there's not an agent?
Well, now you're asking technical questions.
Jamison, how does this work? So, I mean, RapidFire Tools is a great tool, and this seems like a must-have thing right now.
The concept's brilliant, right? I use Network Detective in our MSP. This is kind of how we did our audit in our sales process, and then we leveraged it on an ongoing basis beyond that. So it was they blazed the trail early on for how to and really. To me, what I loved about it from day one was the thinking around how this could really be more of a sales tool and that's really how we leveraged it. It's like we could go in and show pain and show risk, and we were highly successful with that. This is their timing, and I don't know if this is something that was already well in the works or if this is something they turned around this quickly, but well done. I mean, the messaging alone, I don't understand specifically what's going on technically, but the messaging alone and the timeliness of it, it makes a ton of sense. And it's not going to be a short. The beauty of it is, just like we already talked about, is it's not just going to be a temporary solution for the here and now. This is going to matter indefinitely. So this goes back to when I'm talking to leadership teams, and they're like, if you can get creative in these times and think about something that isn't there yet that we need today and we're going to need tomorrow, you come out of it stronger. And this feels to me like a perfect example of that kind of creative thinking. This is what makes companies stronger coming out of the downturn than they were going into it. It's really interesting.
I can answer a piece of that. I can't answer the technical question, but I do know that this is not something that they have been working on for a long time. In fact, the inspiration for this product was input from some of their MSP partners. Just within the last, month and a half, 2 months, people said, it would be great if I could use your product in this particular kind of scenario. And like I said, there wasn't a ton of intellectual property that they had to develop to bring this to life. There was the self-serve portal and the reports, but it is something that they pulled together very, very quickly.
Yeah, it's an MVP. It makes a ton of sense. Turn it around. Oftentimes, it's the branding and the messaging. I mean, you come out of the door with that done right on the backs of a strong product, and that makes a ton of sense. It's great.
From a philosophical perspective, it's making people ask a lot of questions, and I'll ask it just to kind of get your take. When you go to a work at home model, when you traditionally haven't had one, and you are using sometimes personal devices, and what you said is, you don't want to have an agent running on a personal device. People don't want an agent on it. You don't want to look at the computer and say, okay, computer, where did the big bad boss touch you? If you're going to use a device at home for work, isn't that a reasonable expectation or not? Should you be able to run business software if you're going to use that device at work? Yes or no?
That's a super hard question to answer. I think it depends on the culture of the organization. It also depends on who you're talking to, right? Like, so the least compliant people are usually the most senior executives in the organization. Like, it's just, it gets into this whole psychology thing. Ultimately, so the question's been out there forever as it relates to mobile devices. Do I have to carry two? How do I put my work and business stuff? What are the expectations? Are you going to do mobile device management on my phone? This question's been asked for 7-8 years now. Now we're asking about PCs. So the question, I think, comes back to, is it the organization's responsibility to provide the machines that people use to do their work? And so what we've tended to do in our organization, at least if I kind of put myself in the client's shoes, is we're kind of in a weird temporary solution. I feel like long term, if I'm expecting people to work from home, I'm probably going to provide them the means to do so. So I think this is a short-term, really difficult question. Long-term, I suspect that a company-issued laptop goes with the person or whatever, and ultimately it'll be an easier question. I don't want remote agents on my kids. My kids upstairs probably playing Fortnite right now, I would guess. So you weren't far off on that one, Matt. And God knows I don't really care to have anybody spying on all my machines all the time, even my own companies. So I have an expectation that if I need a machine that's I'm going to be dedicated to Smileback, it's going to get issued by Smileback, and that's what I'm going to use. So I think it's a temporary problem for the most part. I also find that what started to happen in mobile device management, and they're getting better and better at even on the PC, is just this ability to really strongly segregate the systems and the data. It's funny that innovation happened on mobile devices far better, far earlier, right? So with Intune, with Azure, I can completely say I can't even copy something out of Microsoft Word on my mobile device and paste it into into Gmail. It won't even let me copy and paste. I'm so isolated, so segregated, everything's protected. It's just not quite the same yet. It's funny that it actually is more protected on the mobile device. So that's the other alternate solution, is kind of getting this buy-in. Hey, if you're going to let us do this, how do we segment a part of your computing power dedicated to work in a protected area? Technically, it could go right back to our VDI conversation. If I'm using VDI, you don't really need to look at my computer. What do you care? It could be anything. I could be running a Chromebook for all I need is VDI, and now that's what you're protecting. So it gets interesting.
Yeah.
And I agree with all of that. I mean, both in terms of there being a shorter term problem and a longer term issue. And I think from a longer term perspective, you know, that mobile device example that you recite. So I mentioned the vendors on the Vanguard list before. We actually have a couple of different products. I won't name them, but there are a couple of different products on the list this year that deal specifically with that scenario of segregating the work data from the personal data on a smartphone. And you're right. I don't know of a lot of great solutions that do that for the PC, but it's a very similar situation with the smartphone, right? Where end users are like, I don't want two phones. I have one phone and I just want to use it for everything I do. And then employers say, well, okay, but it's not cool for you to have this, you know, corporate data intermingling with all your other stuff. When you leave the company, how do we get that out of there and so on? And that's why these tools come along that create this dividing line inside the one device, so that, you know, when somebody leaves a company, it's possible remotely to just remove anything they shouldn't be taking with them. And so a similar thing, I think, is probably coming to the PC at some point. So, you know, either your employer is going to give you a laptop or a desktop or whatever, they're going to give you the work device that you use. Or if you say to the employer, I don't want that. I don't want two computers on my desk at home. I just want to use this one computer. Then the employer is going to say, okay, but you've got to segregate all the work stuff in this solution that doesn't exist yet, and keep it separate from your personal stuff. And that, you know, segregated part of your device, which could be a virtual desktop, that is going to have an agent, you know, on it, and we will be monitoring that. And too bad for you if you don't like it. Essentially, if that makes you uncomfortable, then take this laptop that we want to offer you instead.
Yeah, highlight for next week. So next week, we're going to be talking about this new solution that Rich is talking about. It'll be hitting desktop PCs next week, because no doubt somebody's going to innovate that. And there's a huge need for it. And we'll be talking about it next week. I'm looking at the crystal ball, Rich. I'm taking your job now, right?
Yeah.
I'm probably wrong, but maybe not. All right. Tech Data is also in the news, Rich, and they're rather excited about endpoint solutions, aren't they?
Yeah, you know, and this is it goes right along with everything we're talking about here, and yet is sort of a counterpoint to it in a little way, because we're talking so much about cloud and everything moving to the cloud, and obviously that's been going on for years. But, you know, Tech Data, they really sort of bet the future of the business a few years ago on these four strategic big bet sort of technology areas, and that was IoT and analytics, security, cloud computing, and endpoint solutions. And the endpoint solutions piece of that is the piece that a lot of people see that and they think, well, isn't that yesterday's technology? And, you know, these other things we can see as the future, but are we still talking about endpoints? Linda Rendelman, who runs their endpoint solutions business in the Americas, has this thing she likes to say, which is that until the vendors out there figure out a way to beam the data straight into your head, there are going to be endpoints involved in anything that your customers are doing. Hardware is not going away, right? It's just changing, and the kinds of hardware people use and the way they use it is changing, but endpoints are very much part of the story. And we have seen that in these last 2 months, where everybody gets locked out of the office, they go home, and now there's this tremendous hunger for endpoints, for laptops and other PCs that people can use in a secure fashion from home. So it's actually been, you know, a pretty good few months for Tech Data and the other distributors in terms of sales of endpoints. And I should take a step back and just say the reason we're talking about this at all is because Tech Data held their endpoint symposium this week. Last year, I attended that event. It was an in-person event. It was in Denver. This year, obviously, they were going to do it in person. They couldn't, so they did it virtually. But they dedicated a big block of time to talking about this endpoint solutions opportunity. And they don't see, you know, the momentum that they've had recently as a short-term phenomenon. They say that there was this immediate need that they've been helping their partners and customers meet. But what you're going to see going forward is this sort of second wave of endpoint solution rollout. So there was the whole quick and dirty phase where you got everybody connected somehow on something or other. And then precisely because these work from home arrangements are here to stay, you're going to see a lot of employers looking to upgrade whatever equipment it is that people are using right now. And so that they're, you know, the Windows 7 refresh cycle is behind us now, and this quick little cycle of hardware rollouts mostly behind us now. But there's this new kind of upgrade cycle that's coming along here as businesses start to get interested in equipping their work from home employees with better, more secure hardware.
Yeah, and there's a lot here in this gallery that you put together. Do you want to pick out a couple of points to talk about?
Well, I mean, I'll just say, you know, a lot of what I just talked about there is newer stuff, content essentially that they added to this event in the last 6-8 weeks based on what's happening in the world. But they also, you know, talked a great deal about things like 5G, which, you know, is beginning to roll out commercially now. It's still just a little bit too early to see that as a giant factor in the market, but we've spoken in the last few months about, you know, 5G compatible laptops that are starting to show up. So there is a hardware play around 5G that's on the way as well. Tech Data kind of went out of its way to emphasize if you have a solution or a use case your customer does that would benefit from that kind of high-speed connection, you don't necessarily have to wait for 5G to show up in your geography. 4G LTE technology can actually do a lot more than some people realize it can. So they see a big LTE opportunity, particularly around the IoT as well. One other thing that was interesting to me that I'll highlight is last year when I went to the Endpoint Symposium, I spoke with Linda Rendelman about the Tech as a Service program that Tech Data has, which is sort of their program. All the big distributors have this now, and a lot of the vendors too, the opportunity to pay for hardware on a subscription basis. And it sort of like all of us believe this is how customers want to buy, and this is the future direction of how hardware gets consumed. And I mean, HPE, just to name one company, has basically said within the next few years that everything they sell is going to be available that way. Tech Data has not seen the uptake, the adoption of that program with around endpoints that they were expecting. And this is what I was told a year ago at the Endpoint Symposium. I followed up on it again this year, and a year later, they still sort of feel like there's a lot of education that needs to be done. The end users aren't quite comfortable with the differences in that hardware acquisition model, and they need to be educated. Tech Data is working with its partners to kind of help them explain and sell that model a little bit better to their end users. So it was a little bit surprising to me that that there's still definitely growth happening in that subscription model, but it's slower than they expected it would be.
Jamison,
are you excited about endpoints?
No, I only less from a perspective. When I was on my MSP, it was we kind of started to move at the end as we shifted to cloud to less of a focus on it. We stopped selling them. We helped our clients find the right places to buy them. I always was very aligned with the hardware as a service model, the subscription for hardware. I mean, we're used to doing it again. I'm picking up my cell phone. We're used to doing it with our cell phones. Not everybody does, but consumers are comfortable with that. I think the hard part from an IT services perspective was the financial maturity to set that up, and it's so much easier to do a one and done and sell something and be done with it. And it's really secondary to our service offering, which is where our margins really come from. But it makes a ton of sense as consumers are more educated or can start thinking in the same way, like what the laptop is compared to my cell phone. It's not all that different anymore. Why do I not consume it in a similar financial model is a great question. I'm surprised that it's not taken off more. But I do think part of it is that IT service providers they don't tend to. I knew a couple that would resell AT&T or Verizon and kind of get into mobile, but they kind of stay away from that, and they kind of stay away from hardware as a service because it's just been difficult for them to set it up from an efficiency perspective on their end. How do they transact?
Yeah, very, very interesting. I don't know. If I was a business, I would also say, like, what's the point of owning hardware, right? Like, what am I going to do with it once it's no longer usable? You know, besides sell it to an employee for $20 to take home, and then they have an old computer. So, I definitely think there's some education there in that model. But I think eventually that is where it's going to end up, Jamison. I think you're absolutely right. People will start to realize it's like the phone model. You know, you'll rent it, you'll give it back, and you'll get a new, better, shinier one,
Exactly.
without all that extra hassle. So, we're gonna stop with the news there. We've got a great story coming up about the cloud solution recipe for cyberspace success. I'm really excited about that. We're gonna move that story to after our interview, because we got an interview coming up. We're gonna talk to Jay McBain from Forrester, and we're gonna talk about the impact of the coronavirus on the channel. It's gonna be a great interview. Stick around for that. We will be right back. Hi, welcome back to part 2 of ChannelPro Weekly. We have a great interview guest lined up for you today. Everybody is talking about the coronavirus, surviving it, avoiding it, living with it, adjusting our lives to it. But more importantly, a lot of people are now starting to think about, well, what will its impact be going forward when life kind of somewhat resumes to normal? But what will that new normal look like? And here to talk about that is Jay McBain, Principal Analyst of Channel Partnerships and Alliances at Forrester. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. We're glad to have you on. I'm sure you've got a lot to talk about. You wrote an article about this. Rich, why don't you tell us about that and kind of set this up for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been wanting to have Jay on the show to talk about this for a number of weeks now. Late in March, Jay wrote a post in which he kind of looked at, you have to kind of try to wind back the clock in your head to late in March and how much less we knew then than we know now, how the world looked at that time, how much more kind of confused everyone was than we still are today. But he wrote a really interesting blog post in which he looked at a number of different kinds of scenarios for the future based on how badly damaged the economy is and how those different scenarios play out for the channel, what kind of impact it has on the channel and the channel partners and their future and health and so on. And I remember reading it when I thought it was really interesting and smart. And when I was done, I forwarded it to my boss at ChannelPro. I said, pour yourself a stiff drink and then read this, because this is something that we really need to be thinking about at ChannelPro. And I very much wanted to have you on the show ever since. So tell folks a little bit about the ground you covered in that post, Jay, and then how maybe that has evolved at all in the last month since you wrote that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think 4 weeks feels like 4 years nowadays with the daily/hourly updates that we're getting. And really, we framed and tried to count the COVID crisis and the impact on the channel. I looked at the CDC and they set out, really 4 scenarios, A, B, C, D, with, D being a devastating, multi-million people dying and things like that. And that was the worst case scenario.
Like the Walking Dead situation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you set up the scenarios, to the impact on the channel, what we've basically learned in the last 4 weeks is we're moving out of scenario A and moving into scenario B, which isn't great news. 2 things that we're focused on. One is the recovery and when that starts. There's kind of 2 frames of thinking. So, scenario A really had a September recovery, which is late in 3rd quarter, and more of a V shape, the economy bouncing back. Scenario B, especially in the United States, has a 4th quarter recovery and then more of a U-shaped. And the differences between the 2 are actually pretty stark. You've got, today, 25% of partners, based on research, struggle to break even. They struggle to make money in the best of times. And that's the most vulnerable. And that's not different than other small businesses. You hear, average small businesses in the United States and the struggle that they have. But the scenario A had about a $50 billion reduction in revenue for the channel. And now that we're moving into scenario B as the most likely outcome, we're talking $200 to $300 billion, and that's global, of reduction in channel opportunity. We've basically gone from 4.2% growth in 2020 to negative 8.8% growth. And, that could bring the bankruptcies and the forced into M&A and activities upwards to the numbers that we saw in 2008, which is a very serious impact on the channel.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything you can do to even begin to quantify that a little bit, even if it's just referencing what happened in that 2008, 2009 kind of time frame? I mean, what portion of the channel is likely to, go under or be involved in a merger or acquisition?
Yeah, so one thing that we learned, and it's interesting watching, hour by hour as this has gone on, is the response by vendors and distributors, larger partners to this. 2008 was around credit, capital, and the ability to get cash flow. And you've seen vendors, you've kind of seen the good, the bad, the ugly in terms of response. You've seen distributors also stand up, but most of the responses have really been around credit. Understanding, accelerating program payments, relaxing some of the tiered program elements, getting more money hopefully into the hands of customers and partners during this early, and using some flexibility that they have in terms of accelerating payments and really focusing on the money element of this, which is good. All the thoughts and prayers and we're with you in this, all that verbiage goes out the window. When it actually comes to paying your employees, paying your rent, and keeping the enterprise, keeping the organization running. So that's the focus, and I think that that's going to have a positive effect, and help I think partners maneuver these months. So, we're still in April. Tomorrow is May, but we're talking September, October, November to some sense of recovery where some of these revenue streams and the contracts and the cancellations, all the things that we're going through right now, start to return to some normalcy.
I had wanted to ask you about this actually, because it's come up a lot on the podcast. I've done a lot of writing about it in the last few weeks. I mean, like you said, the distributors, the vendors, they've rolled out a lot of credit-oriented partner financial assistance programs of one kind or another. And each one, there's almost been this effort to sort of, each one to one up the other. HPE had announced at one point that we're putting $2 billion into partner financial assistance. And I think it was the next week, Cisco said, we're doing 2.5. And then Dell said, we're doing 9. So there have been some pretty substantial commitments made. Does it feel adequate to the need from your perspective, as you kind of look at what you're hearing from the vendors and the distributors right now? Have they stepped up the way they need to, or is there more that they could or should be doing?
Yeah, and I'm in conversations with all the channel chiefs at the big vendors behind these, and they're getting feedback as well. And the channel's never been quiet in terms of offering feedback, and it's this idea that when the rubber hits the road. So Dell offers $9 billion. So to your average, channel partner that's out there with 8 employees and trying, there's a human element of this, which makes the channel different than other industries, is they can't just go and furlough their employees or lay off a set of employees for, a number of months hoping to hire them back. Because if you actually remember way back, in January, which seems like 10 years ago, a big CompTIA survey said that the number one issue that owner principals were facing was hiring, retaining, finding the best talent. So in a situation like this, which has impacted most people in multiple ways, but psychologically, if you are a technician at a small 8-person firm, you may look for more protection coming out of this. If you are furloughed, you might go and take your skills and go work for the local utility company or government, or take your skills and go work for a big company like Microsoft or AWS or something like this. This idea of working with entrepreneurs and working puts you at more risk. And then personally, it might put your family, you're paying your mortgage and putting food on the table. So this could be a lasting impact, which is the human element. And running a company that's a services company is difficult because 80% of your costs are people, and that's the one thing that you can't really aggressively move on, where a restaurant or a hotel or something else can. And so the feedback that these major vendors are getting are really where the rubber hits the road. Here are my expenses today. Here is my income. Here is exactly how your program is either helping or not helping me. And after all these major billion-dollar programs hit the street, a lot of partners figured out quickly that these are more customer focused programs. You know, they might help customers with, you know, cancellation fees, or they might extend payments, or they might help delay payments and things like that. But in terms of paying your payroll and in terms of running your own P&L, a lot of these program dollars, these big dollars that we're seeing, aren't specifically funneling into partners' bank accounts, and that's a challenge.
So I had a question, Jay. This is kind of a domino effect, which might be a little bit selfish because I'm thinking about my software companies, but that are on the back end of the PSA. But I look at, you know, can you talk a little bit about the domino effect? So it starts with small businesses. We saw this surge in activity in MSPs, but not being sure that the money was going to follow the surge in activity. So I talked to many people who are like 2-3x tickets getting this figured out, but then they don't know if the money's coming. So how long does it take before they're impacted? Because I think we're just starting to see the beginning of that wave. And then when they're impacted, now it's a couple more months before all of the vendors and everybody who they like, how does that domino effect work?
It definitely is. And what made this different than other downturns? This wasn't an economic downturn. It was a pandemic. And, you know, different than any time, you know, in our lifetimes or our parents' lifetimes, you know, this was sending everyone home. So of the 600,000 VARs and resellers and managed service providers, kind of the global technology community, 72% of them saw an upsurge, like you said, you know, 2x, 3x in terms of activity. Everyone needed a laptop. So once Dell and HP and Lenovo and everyone was sucked dry, you know, they went to Amazon and started, you know, flooding consumer laptops, you know, into everyone's hands. Everyone needed a VPN or some, you know, secure way to get at enterprise class data with a consumer notebook, through a consumer network, through a consumer router, getting to enterprise class data. That took, you know, quite a bit of work. You've seen the incredible numbers posted in UCAS. You know, Microsoft just came out this morning with all of their numbers, and you know, they have added, you know, 40% new users in the last couple of weeks. They're up to, you know, the numbers are staggering. You know, Zoom with 300 million active participants a day. They had to walk back what a user is versus a participant because they were double counting. You can see some financial implications there later on. But, you know, between Microsoft and Cisco and everyone else, just incredible numbers being posted. And what you're saying is right on, because there's a legacy effect here. So when this 72% surge in activity gets charged for, there is a delay in payments. There is a, you know, basically a shutdown in infrastructure spend. And every customer is doing everything they can with their own P&Ls to survive this crisis. So, you know, basically all projects have been put on hold. And while there was some, you know, tactical spend to get this working, there is a long-term effect here. You know, from, you know, the rest of the infrastructure spend, starting to question every line item in every managed services contract, you know, given this new normal. And if any of those charges, which the majority are on-premises type of charges, and there is no on-premises, you know, what does that mean? But what does the rest of the business look like, you know, in terms of how a partner makes money? And, you know, given that there's delays and there's furloughs to that spend, but then there's customers as well that aren't healthy and aren't paying their bills. And so all these things together create what you said is this domino effect. And, you know, it starts to spiral on top of itself. And that's why, you know, over the summertime is such a critical period for capital and credit and building out the cash flows to perhaps get to September, assuming that we can start to see some recovery.
You know, we've been talking a lot on the podcast in recent weeks about this ongoing phenomenon, and it predates the coronavirus pandemic, but there has been some degree of consolidation, let's call it, in the managed services space in particular, where you're seeing these bigger MSPs with regional or national footprints coming along. I mean, do you see the economic fallout, the effects that you're talking about there kind of fueling and accelerating that process? Are we likely to come out of the bottom of the U-shaped recession with a smaller number of much bigger MSPs?
I think that will accelerate that part of the market. And the MSP market is now 20 years old. So it's going through a natural maturing of the industry. And, for any industry that would have 50,000, decentralized companies out serving each town and city and city block out there, it doesn't make sense. So what happens is prices start to consolidate. There's compression in terms of margins. There is a maturing in terms of delivery. And, people like Jamison have been behind, these best practices and really driving this industry to maturity. But what happens at that point is, if the average MSP has 8 people, within those 8 people, you are running a company. You're running, obviously, the operations and the finance and the HR and all the other sales and marketing pieces of it. The actual delivery, which is the technicians and the billable hours, becomes a component of that. If you can strip away all of that overhead and make those 8 people deployable and serviceable by the hour and take up the HR and HQ and everything else somewhere else, you get the efficiencies of scale. And so that's, how a private equity company can put together, 30 or 40 MSPs and make profit where perhaps the sum of the parts were just breaking even. So that's going to happen, and that's going to accelerate, as we go through this U shape. And that's what I talked about, 25% of companies being susceptible to a scenario B impact. And they may be forced into an M&A activity that, doesn't have anything close to the valuations that we were talking about even 3 months ago.
So let's maybe broaden the conversation out a little bit beyond MSPs, because you talked about this a bit in the blog post. I'm curious to just kind of hear your thoughts some more about it. Let's talk a little bit about, winners and losers, let's say, in this economy that we're heading into now, because there are obviously MSPs, but there are also resellers and companies that rely on project work out there. There are companies that make a lot of their money on hardware versus cloud software. So if you were to sort of handicap the companies that are maybe best positioned to get through the next 6 to 12 months versus the ones that are going to have the hardest time going forward, what might you point out?
Well, what we're doing a lot of surveys with customers, and everything's been frozen, but as things start to open up, what are the opportunities into the next stage? So if you call the first stage the triage stage, the laptops, the VPNs, the edge security, the UCAS. The second stage has really been wrapped around 4 opportunities. One, and far and away the winner, is automation. So we're seeing categories like RPA, robotic process automation, BPA, business process automation, BPO, business process outsourcing, as key, tips of the spear. But every software company, 175,000 software companies, have an automation element to their applications. So this idea of how to help, because this crisis was a human crisis. Many of the business workflows, the logic, the processes were broken when people went home. So the idea is businesses are going to invest in the areas to make all of these things, the workflows, less people-centric. And I think that one of the biggest opportunities coming out of this is really to drive that level of automation. 2 is we're obviously seeing cloud acceleration. We're coming off Azure growing by 64%. You've seen AWS growing by 51%, Google growing by a similar number. This is before the crisis. You might start seeing these platforms hit triple digits. We're seeing SaaS companies, following the top 20, the Salesforces, the Workdays, the ServiceNows, the Marketos, the NetSuites. They're all growing by 30% before the crisis. You may see that double, after the crisis. So there's a huge opportunity in, accelerating digital transformation or cloud type projects. Third has really been around the security, the redundancy, the business continuity conversation. Because again, this has exposed a lot of companies. I mentioned consumer networks and consumer laptops, and every day you have information around Zoom, having exposures and things like that. So there's going to be a huge force on edge security and new threat vectors, new conversations around redundancy and compliance and continuity that need to happen. So there are lots of opportunities where dollars are going to free up, and what we're hearing from customers of all size. And then the final one that they're basically asking for is business consulting. They have to make it through this crisis as well. And in many cases, the managed service provider or the VAR is, integrated into that decision chain. What are the technologies? What are the ideas? What are the different strategies that we could use working with the executive team or working with the owner principal of the customer to basically not only allow them to survive, but perhaps thrive and get a leg up on their competition coming out of this crisis. Those are really the 4 areas that we're seeing in terms of opportunity over the summer timeframe going into third quarter.
So, and maybe that what you just said answers this next question. But I mean, if you were to advise the folks in our audience, what should they be thinking about? What should they be doing? How should they be retooling or rethinking their business to position it not just to survive, but to succeed beyond the recession? I mean, how does the channel or do successful channel partners look different going forward? And what should folks listening to this or watching this right now be doing to make sure that they are part of that new channel?
Yeah, we've seen a channel that's really come out of this as more agile, more responsive, and more cross-functional than ever. And that's what customers are looking for. The other interesting thing as we talk to customers is the channel's brand has increased substantially during this. I report on a lot of the buying journeys and these new buyers and what do they mean, and 73% of them love marketplaces and buying direct and e-commerce and kind of this movement over time. But this pandemic, if anything else, has reminded people why having good local service and people that can roll up their sleeves and get inside an organization is so important. So I think leveraging that increase in brand, why these companies have really helped customers, helped their communities. They've been essential, not only as definition from the government, but they truly been essential in front of customers. And now how do you walk out of that? What's your communication strategy? It has to have empathy. It obviously, can't be tone deaf, but you can leverage that as an essential, member of the team and start to have these conversations going forward and elevating your ability to influence your customers at a higher level than you have in the past, at a business level. Around that business consulting, having the right tone. Now's not the time to advertise, non-essential purchases, but now's the time to dig in to where they hurt the most and what this pandemic has exposed. And I think it's the best time ever, for channel partners to really show their value and come out of this with much stronger contracts and much more opportunity to really build a stronger future for each customer.
Yeah, absolutely. Very insightful stuff. Unfortunately, we're getting close to running out of time. Jamison, do you have any other thoughts or questions you'd like to add?
I mean, it's just so confirming to hear all this stuff, and it's really interesting. I think, Jay, you may know I'm a coach at ConnectStrat, so it's nice to hear kind of what leadership teams need to be thinking about to come out of this stronger. I couldn't agree more, and it just kind of validates what we're seeing. I do hope that we stay more in scenario A than scenario B, but I really think that I said earlier here that wealth is made and lost in economic upheavals, and it sounds like there's going to be some real M&A opportunity in the mid-late summer for folks who are strong and ready to execute. So that's going to be an interesting conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very much so. And hopefully next time we can talk about the impact of another crisis that is brewing on the horizon, and that's the mustache crisis. Because as everybody's working from home, they're all growing beards, and some of them are going to choose to bring back those awful 80s mustaches, that are big and bushy and kind of just right there. It's going to happen. And that is going to be scary times for all as you interface with your customers. So keep that in mind if you're growing a beard. Jay, thank you so much for coming on and being with us today and talking about this. For those who want to learn, follow your writing or learn more about you, where can they find you?
I'm pretty well everywhere, just on social media of any type, or just hit Forrester.com and you'll find me pretty quick.
Excellent. Again, thank you so much for being here, everyone. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the cloud solution recipe for cyberspace success. I've got a tech pick and a museum pick for you, so you'll want to see what those are. And Rich will break down what has been and what will be. Lots more to come. Stick around. We'll be right back. And we are back with part 3 of ChannelPro Weekly. Rich, what a great interview with Jay. He's like one of the smartest people I've ever heard talk. Very clear, very concise, but very insightful. What did you take out of that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot actually to pull out of that. But one thing I did want to highlight, though, is the subject that you brought up, Jamison, and that that domino effect idea that the two of you were talking about, which is something that's very much on my mind recently. I'm guessing on yours as well. It's kind of a scary thing, and you're in a perfect position to talk about this actually, because you were very early to the Microsoft CSP program, a very early kind of cloud service provider. And I keep talking, specifically in the realm of cloud, I keep talking to MSPs and others who are offering cloud services to their customers. This stuff it's all kind of billed in arrears. That you're getting billed by Microsoft, let's say, for the cloud stuff that you're selling to your customers. Then you're billing your customers for it, and the customers increasingly are coming back and saying, "I don't have the money to pay you," and you're left kind of holding the bag. And I think you're exactly right, as you were saying. This is not something maybe that is being felt heavily right now, but it's coming. There's more and more of that coming, and it's a frightening prospect.
Yeah, and I like the way Jay even phrased it. It's like it just feels like we're the day all this hit. Like if I look at Smileback, for example, where we've been around and have a significant number of customers for a small SaaS company, we saw some just immediate sharp, not bad, but some churn right away from people who weren't really, that were panicked maybe, and then it stopped, and it's been pretty level. And my suspicion is that there were a couple knee-jerk reactions from less prepared MSPs just day one, right? But for the most part, people are like, all right, we gotta make this work. We've got to make this work. And now things are pretty stable, but I think we're right at that point now where MSPs are going to start feeling, and that's where I was curious about the domino effect. And then once the MSPs feel it for a while, and 25%, it was great to get some numbers and start thinking about what could this look like. If 25% are impacted, it's the entire channel now behind them starts to get impacted. If they can't pay those bills, or they begin to churn out of the software that they're using and the hardware they're buying and the platforms they're leveraging, they're impacted, and then it's kind of a whiplash that comes back, right? So that's good. That's why it's not a V and becomes a U for the whole channel beyond just the economy. I feel like there's a cycle here that we just don't have clarity on. And it's really interesting. That article is amazing. I just hoping we don't dip too far into scenario B, because it's going to be somewhat devastating if we do.
When we talk about this, it almost sounds like we always look at the vendors that they're like invulnerable here because they're the ones putting up the money. But eventually, I mean, if it really starts impacting, end users, and they can't pay, they therefore stop using the tools. At some point, this can start affecting a lot of the big vendors, right?
I think it could. I mean, they're going to be more resilient. I mean, I have a little more fear for the small vendor, and I'm not being selfish in the statement, but yes, incredible things happen from the big vendors. We rely on them; they'll survive. We've seen craziness happen. I go way back in the HP Compact Day or whatever. They tend to be able to reinvent and do things. But the creativity and innovation that comes out of small SaaS companies and these vendors that are really creating unique and quick value to the channel, small to mid-size, that's where I get concerned, because there's just so much innovation right now in tech. It's just fun times watching what's happening, and it'll be interesting and unfortunate if we have a 6 to 12 month delay in what's happening from an innovation. On the other hand, we're seeing incredible creativity and innovation. because people have the time to do it and the wherewithal to do it. So it's going to just be interesting to see how that plays out.
Very, very much so. Rich, we have a story that we kind of held over from the top of the show that talks a little bit about cloud solution recipes. Now, we have to start the oven and preheat to 400?
Nope. None of that involved. But there are some things that you might need to prepare a little bit. So this, we're referring to in an article that I wrote for the magazine about cloud solutions. This is something that we've been talking about at ChannelPro for a while. And when we talk about cloud solutions, essentially we're trying to contrast a market opportunity from cloud products. Everyone has known for years, if you're reselling a cloud product like Office 365, for example, that is a low margin, very commoditized kind of business. It's hard to build a business around that unless you grow to some kind of enormous scale in terms of the numbers of customers that you are supporting and landing every month, et cetera. So the key to being in the cloud profitably for a ChannelPro is building and delivering cloud solutions. And we talk in the article here about a number of different models for that. It can be something as simple as offering cloud migration solutions or lift and shift solutions. There are, especially now when everybody has discovered the merits of being in the cloud, as we've been discussing, there are so many workloads out there that are still on premises. There are customers that are going to be looking for help bringing those workloads into the cloud. That's project work as opposed to sort of recurring revenue work, but there's going to be a lot of it out there. It's pretty profitable, and there's expertise required to assess those needs and actually perform the migration up into something like AWS or Azure. As you get beyond some of that into stuff that gets maybe even a little bit more sophisticated, and Jay was sort of alluding to this before, you can start getting into business process optimization, where you're really starting to understand a customer's workflows and helping them digitize those, streamline those with tools. Different kind of skill set, less technical, more business consulting kind of skill set. You might need different people to do it, but it's very, very sticky, very high profit work if you can do that. So all sorts of detail about this in the article. We will obviously link to the article from the show sheet for this episode here. But it turns out, again, I did not know that we would be posting the story in the last few days. I didn't know that when I invited Jamison to join us on the show. But it turned out to be perfect timing because Jamison has participated in webinars for us at ChannelPro before on this very topic, this whole cloud solutions topic. He has consulting work that he has done with other MSPs who want to understand this. So I'm sort of going to hand things over to you a little bit, Jamison, here, and just kind of invite you to explain to folks the difference between a cloud solution and what they might be doing in the cloud right now, and what's entailed in making that transition.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to talk about that a little bit. I think it's going to be interesting to see, so I've spoken on this many times, and we've sat and talked about it. And there's this transition, and it's been a fear for a lot of MSPs to transition from this approach that's been primarily on-premise, server-based, device-based. Jay talked about this has been a 20-year industry, and the folks who, it doesn't look today like it did 20 years ago, right? I mean, it's the same people doing it, but what we're having to do is much different. And the fear is exactly what you just talked about. As I shift to these cloud-based products, Office 365 being the simplest and most obvious example, it's a commodity. And I made my money in the first 10 or 15 years of my business selling Windows Server and Exchange Server, Active Directory, and there was some money in the product, but it was really about all the services around how we deliver the product. And the fear is that when we move into these more commoditized cloud-based solutions, that we no longer control the technology. Like, it's a difficult thing being an IT service provider. Basically, we have to sell and support what we didn't build, right? And that's a tricky thing. And now with commoditized cloud services, we even feel another step removed because there's the ability through technology for direct interaction with those providers. So, but what's interesting is while we're feeling price compression, moving to cloud and these commoditized solutions, we also can reduce our cost of delivery because I no longer need senior network and server engineers walking around with screwdrivers making things happen. So there's this shift that has to happen, and there's opportunity because now what it takes to circumnavigate this wealth of services that are in the cloud, people think it's going to be easy. It actually is vastly more complex. It's not just a server with everything sitting in my office. I now have to navigate this. And as service providers, my margin's always been in my service. It hasn't been in the product. So my consultative efforts in talking about this, I think Chris in your article is spot on. It's like I can sell a wealth of product, but my margins are actually pretty low on the product itself. It's how do I deliver the next level of value to my clients to maintain my margins and my top level service revenue? What does that transition look like? So that it's been a really, really interesting time to watch people start to make those types of transitions. Jay was talking about customers are looking at their MSP invoices and they're looking for lines that have to do with premise-based support. The fear for an MS, and they're removing them, right? And an MSP that hasn't graduated beyond that mentality or isn't delivering value beyond that vendor-based mentality, they're in a bit of trouble and they're having to reinvent themselves. And this is the opportunity to do so. For us and our MSPs, we started to embrace the commoditization of an Exchange server, Office 365. We were completely done with those many years ago. We now begin to deliver things like business intelligence through Power BI and all of these things that instead of us being a janitor or a vendor for our clients, we were now delivering consultative business value. I liken this shift to cloud computing to going back to my roots. I started my business in 1995 as a consultant. What is this new thing they call email, right? And to date myself just a little bit, and helping business owners figure out what a website is and email and how to leverage it. And then I created an MSP out of the necessity to build infrastructure and help them do this technically. But this migration to cloud is like, I don't need to do as much of that anymore from a technical perspective. I can now deliver value back to my clients from a business perspective. And I think that's exactly what this is all about. If I can take the best of breed solutions to deliver really seamless, high security, high value, probably low margin for me products, but then deliver all the value on top of it that allows them to run their businesses better, I can give them a strategic advantage in their space. And that was really our focus and how we grew our Tyrion and ultimately exited successfully.
So I kind of touched on this issue before. I'm curious what your real world experience was, though. I mean, as you make that move from the janitor role to the business consultant role, did you need to hire different people? Did you need to teach the people you have different skills?
Very interesting. So one of the two, and so a perfect segue. I found that our sales, account management, back office, finance, and leadership team staff mostly was the same. Our young, I don't want to say younger necessarily, but our more entry level technical staff actually made the conversion very quickly, because all of a sudden it's like, hey, we're supporting any SaaS app on an iPhone instead of Windows Server. They're like, thank you, I don't have to learn Windows Server. I know how to do this, right? So that was pretty cool. So the younger generation is like on board. It was the really difficult piece was my higher cost, more senior network and infrastructure engineers. I was like, guess what? We're out of the Active Directory server, Exchange server game. And some of them wanted to make that change and relearn skills. Some of them were like, nah, I'm 50. I'm not learning. And so I was like, well, let me help you find your next job, because we aren't going to be doing that here anymore. So we started to shift towards understanding data, understanding business intelligence, understand how to deliver true VCIO level services. How do I shift my senior people who really had the acumen and desire to rethink what they're invested in their future and the future of technology, or having to also, for those who couldn't make that transition, how do I invest in some talent who could help me do that? And so we were very early. I learned from a good friend of mine, Richard Anderson. We moved to the per user model instead of per device model. We weren't fighting these transitions to cloud from a pricing because it was all delivery on a monthly cost model that made sense. I'd love to sell into CFOs. And now I could show them that, hey, what I'm doing when I move you to the cloud is I'm going to give you more accretive value in my service delivery. I don't need to send somebody out there with a screwdriver. Instead, I'm going to deliver to you a daily dashboard of your leadership metrics. They're like, well, I didn't care about screwdriver, but and I'm going to do it for the same price. And there's a lot of power in that. So that was really how we transcended that business model shift.
And you mentioned some of the operational roles, that made the transition more easily. But I'm wondering about sales in particular, because that conversation you were just hinting at there might not be the one that somebody who's used to selling hardware, is qualified to have.
True. No, it's not an overnight thing. So we were never selling hardware. It just wasn't part of well, we'd sell maybe an onboarding project. It was never our focus. We were selling our services, our brand promise. So it was always about value and service delivery more than product. If we'd been more product, this would have been a harder transition. What we did have to do is be really clear with our account managers, our kind of farmers, and our hunters, our salespeople, that we were no longer bringing in customers that expected us to deliver service against a premise-based infrastructure. Like it allowed us to create significant wedges between us and our competition, because let's say we went into, this was rare, but let's say we went into a situation where there were four MSPs all bidding on a project, and 3 of them are basically, like Jay said, at this point in maturity, price equivalent, really hard to differentiate in the market. And our delivery was, if you're not willing to jump into the modern cloud area and remove your entire infrastructure and let us deliver at a much higher value delivery than what you're doing today, then we're probably not the right vendor for you. And it immediately weeded out the clients we didn't want, who wanted to stay in that kind of traditional, archaic infrastructure. If they weren't on board with us to move to modern technology, then they weren't the right client. So that was, our salespeople and our account managers loved that messaging, because they suddenly, while we struggled for years to find a differentiator, it was crystal clear what our differentiator was, and we were getting the right clients. Very
interesting. And we've also learned that you're very anti-screwdriver. I don't know how to feel.
I don't like screwdrivers.
Phillips head or flathead, or are you just like
flatheads? I can deal with occasional Phillips, but flatheads are awful.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good strategy to always differentiate yourself. Now, but what do you do when you went in on that all cloud model, and you're saying this is the service delivery level we're going to get? Well, eventually everyone's going to catch up to you. What do you do after that to differentiate yourself?
Well, now the options go like this. I mean, welcome to the world of tech and SaaS and cloud. That's where I get super excited. Like, what are you good at and what do your clients need? So I think we're creating even more opportunity for a vertical approach. I mean, it's always been, the MSPs who could go vertical well within their geography and specialty, they create a stronger valuation. They create higher levels of operational maturity. It's better in every way. It's just very hard to do. We never got there. We had little segments of verticalization, but we were pretty horizontal. But I think with this, we have the ability to either get vertical in terms of the industries we're supporting successfully, because we get very strong with specific SaaS and cloud solutions, or we get very vendor vertical. So for me, that was what we were very good at. We didn't touch G Suite. We were very, very, very good at Microsoft cloud solutions. So we found people who were on board with the technologies we wanted to do, and we delivered that vertical value very well. And then we said, okay, here's the technology, Power BI, whatever, here's the technology we're going to leverage to deliver business value. So it allows people to really, come into these vertical segments and get very, very good at what they do. And I think that's going to become the differentiator. If we're all cloud providers, we're not all delivering the same cloud solution. They look different. And there's going to be uniqueness there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very, very interesting stuff, and we could probably talk about that forever. But unfortunately, we're running very long in this particular episode. And Jamison, I know you're not a huge hardware fan, but guess what we're going to talk about next? Hardware. So for those who've been watching the show for a while, know that I am a kind of a hardware guy, always have been, and I have a massive collection of old, interesting pieces of hardware, IT, consumer CE, all kinds of stuff. I like to say it's my hobby. My wife likes to say it's my disease. One day you'll see me on Hoarders, probably. But I just can't throw anything away. But my hoarding is your good fortune. So we're going to talk a little bit about an interesting find. So I have like this. Rich has seen my office and my graveyard, and knows I've just got drawers and drawers and closets full of just old stuff. And I have a drawer that's like an old input peripheral drawer. So I reached in and I grabbed something, and I pulled out one that kind of made me laugh, because every computer, especially back in the day, came with one of these things. It was maybe their way of differentiating against their competitors. But I pulled out the old Dell pack-in PS2 mouse. It's black. It says Dell on it in white letters. It's got the the little green PS2 cord. It's a 3-button wheel mouse. So this kind of puts it between 1998 and 2000s. Well, with the PS2, 2003, maybe 2004. I can't remember when they went over to USB. But look, it's got the ball on it. It's like the ball mouse. Jamison, how many of these did you have at one point?
Buckets.
I got a whole drawer full of them.
They were all Dell. I'm kind of laughing because I'm pretty sure if I looked hard enough, I'd find one.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I've got a whole drawer full of these things from various brands, and
then the keyboard has the purple PS2, right?
yes, it does. Although I don't know where the keyboard is, because I reached into the input, basically the mouse drawer, and I've got. Oh, Rich, we could spend episodes upon episodes just talking about mice. Pack-in mice. But I always kind of laugh when I see these, because so many people end up using these things because, it came with the computer. I plug it in and it kind of works. But the pack-in mouse is always terrible, right? Jamison, do you use the pack-in mouse?
What's funny? It's just such a funny conversation. I literally so I'm shopping for a new computer. I'm using a Surface Book Pro, and when I have multi-monitors everywhere, it gets a little much with the GPU and the Zoom calls and everything. So I need a good gaming PC with the GPU. But I just bought a really high-end Logitech keyboard mouse they each have 3 Bluetooth, and it's something called Flow, where I can have it connected to my laptop, my desktop, and my phone, and I can copy and paste and move things between them with the same keyboard and mouse. It comes tomorrow.
Cool, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm excited. We'll see. It's different days.
Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about this mouse as my tech pick. We talked about this one before. This is the Logitech Master 2S that has that similar feature.
I just bought the 3.
The 3, yeah. The one's a little older. Great mouse.
Okay, good.
I really do enjoy it. And the Flow feature works pretty well if you have like 3 different machines kind of stacked up there.
Did the right thing. You're making me feel good.
Yeah. At least I found it to work pretty well. If you have trouble, some people say they have trouble with the Flow thing with the copy and paste. There's another software solution you can get. I think it's made. Oh, I'll connect with you offline. But there's another like piece of software you can buy that kind of also does that, and supposedly works. If you have trouble with Flow, that one works better. But anyway, back to cheap mice. So if you're selling hardware, deploying hardware with clients, and you deploy a desktop and it comes with pack-in mouse, you can give them that, and they'll use it, and they kind of work, but it's a miserable experience. They generally are cheap and flimsy, and they don't always do a good job. But you're missing an opportunity. Input peripherals are an opportunity to improve the customer's experience and to make margin, because if you're doing hardware, we know that there's not always a lot of margin at the commodity desktop level, but a lot of the times it's the input peripherals that help you interface with that machine that really customize the experience and can make it so much better, and there's margin there. So that is going to lead me to my tech pick. Unless Rich, Rich, you're eyeing this. I know you really want to go back to a pack-in mouse?
Well, especially one with the ball on the bottom there that I have to clean the dust out.
Yeah, the little rollers in there, you gotta like scrape the hair and gunk off
I
of it.
waited until it was like bumping across. I was like, what's going on? Oh yeah.
I feel bad for the company that used to make these little balls though. You know, they're kind of heavy. Like, I wonder what happened to that company, man. Like, they were probably like on top of the world and then they were bankrupt. Cursing the US, the optical sensor all the way through bankruptcy. All right, so my tech pick this week, I'm going to kind of play that was then, this is now. And we just talked about a Logitech mouse, and Logitech makes a lot of great aftermarket mice. So we've talked about many of them on the show, and I think even the last time we talked about mice, I picked a Logitech mouse, probably my Master 2S, because I was probably so enamored with it at the time, because it's wonderful. But there are other companies than Logitech that make really good peripherals. We've also talked about the Microsoft IntelliMouse before, and they kind of brought back their classic IntelliMouse design and finally have a good mouse on the market after going into that weird arch touch mice that just are awful to use. No offense, Microsoft, but the IntelliMouse is like great. But there's a company that's often overlooked because they normally are looked at for their keyboard switches and their keyboards, and that's Cherry. Have you ever used a Cherry keyboard, Jamison?
I have not.
So yeah, so they make a lot of the switches that end up being on like really high end, like gaming keyboards, the clickety clackety ones, real nice stuff. So, but they also make some really good mice. And one of the ones that I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to put a picture of it up here on the screen for those who are watching on YouTube, is the Cherry MW2310. This is a great high quality 6-button mouse. It's got 3 adjustable resolutions on it. It's got a nice optical sensor. It's wireless and RF. But their claim to fame with this mouse and the one that immediately preceded it is with a couple set of was it AA or AAAs? I can double check here. On 2 AA batteries, it will last for about 3 years. So if you're using if you're one of the persons who always forgets to charge the mouse or going through a set of batteries every week, this might be the one for you because it can, last a long time. It comes with that small receiver. This one's an ergonomic one, so if you're deploying mice and you're looking for a really good mouse you can sell that'll kind of set you apart, this one works with right-hand or left-handed people, and it's really easy to set up and use, and it's got side buttons for browsing and a nice wheel. And Cherry's often overlooked on this kind of stuff, so I thought I would point that out. Jamison, how many you want? I'll get them in the mail for you today.
One.
Now, if you just want a Master 3, I think you went a little even more high end.
I might have gone a little overboard. I decided to go for it. I wanted the that looks really awesome. I was like, it actually looks kind of similar. I was big into the 3 different Bluetooth because actually I just bought a Dell and returned it because I didn't love how everything was working, but the mouse and keyboard that came with it did the 3 different Bluetooth, and I was like, that part of it I liked, even though I didn't love the inbox thing. I did like that piece, so that's why I did a little research, and that's where I landed. So,
yeah, very, very cool. And this is a good one. It's very cost effective, but you can deploy at good margins for those interested. Now, it doesn't have to see. Now, I know you're talking about the 3-button thing, but Jamison, the Master series has Logitech's auto sensing scroll wheel.
Oh,
now,
that thing on the top?
Yeah, so the wheel on it, like it's in like a clicky mode a lot of the times when you're just kind of doing it, but I'll hold up to the microphone here. So you hear that it's got that kind of click sound to it. Well, if you spin it fast, it unlocks and it goes into this really fast rotate, like it's like a free spin kind of mode. So if you're in a real long Excel sheet, it'll just fly through it. Like I got used to this. I owned the first mouse. In fact, what do you know? It's right here. We're talking mice today. And we've talked about this one on the show, but since you're here, we're talking about it. The first mouse that they ever came out with that used that kind of wheel was this one. I was obviously in awful shape because I used it forever. But this was called the Logitech MX Revolution, or just the Revolution, one of the two. And it was the first mouse to have that. And I fell in love with that feature, that auto sensing scroll wheel. And I couldn't live without it. And I ended up using this one forever because they took it away for a long time. And it was like a manual select. You had to select click mode yourself or freewheel. it wasn't the auto sensing. And then finally, when they brought the Master Series back, they brought this feature back. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can finally get my mouse again. It's awesome stuff. You'll love it. You'll love it.
Cool.
Okay. So enough mouse talk, but that's my museum pick. The Dell Pack-In Cheapo PS2 mouse that came with every desktop back in the day. And my tech pick, the Cherry MW2310 2.0. Rich.
Mm-hmm.
My friend Rich.
Mm-hmm.
Things happened this week. And I bet James Gaskin wrote about them. And I bet you're going to be on your big goofy hat and you're going to get your crystal ball and you're going to tell us what might happen next week.
Yes, indeed. The big hat and the crystal ball are just off camera for those of you who are watching, but they're nearby. If you want to find out about stuff that happened in the week that was that maybe we haven't talked about yet here on the podcast, you can check in every Friday, our In Case You Missed It post, written by James Gaskin. We'll catch you up on all sorts of news that may have swept your attention. An interesting new sort of integrated firewall solution from Zyxel and McAfee that came out this week. Veeam announced a new Azure backup solution. And there's some new and interesting processors from Intel. James will have all the details for you in terms of this week. Now, looking ahead to next week, there's a little bit of hardware news that I know about but can't talk about. The thing that I'm sort of interested in is to see whether or not Dell will have any hardware news. Next week was supposed to be when they hold their big partner event or user event in Las Vegas. They have knocked that back into October and turned it into a virtual event, obviously because of the coronavirus. But I'm curious to see if they're going to have some news that they had been building towards around that May timeframe. Anyway, I wouldn't be surprised if something pops up.
Excellent. Well, lots to look forward to there. And wow, what a great show this has been. I want to extend a very, very warm thank you to Jamison West, strategic coach of ConnectStrat, CEO of Smileback and TimeZest, for donating his time to guest host with us today and sharing his insights. Lots of amazing stuff. Thank you so much. For people who want to learn more about your companies and or follow you on the socials, where can they go? How can they contact you?
Probably easiest to just find me on LinkedIn, Jamison West, and not a lot of Jamison West out there, so usually pretty easy to find. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a great time and educational.
Good. Well, I hope you had fun, and I hope we I know this one was a kind of a long one, but hopefully we'll get you back as a guest host sometime again in the future.
Excellent.
All right. Well, that is going to wrap up episode 144. The website, channelpronetwork.com, is where you should set your homepage. We have news, articles, press releases, downloads, white papers, podcasts, you name it. Great stuff for you to help you navigate these crazy coronavirus times. Awesome resources to help you survive, grow your business, and even thrive. Make sure that you go there each and every day, all day, new stuff coming at you all the time. We are Channel Pro Network on Facebook. We are at Channel Pro SMB on Twitter. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Matt Whitlock. Rich, you are?
At Rich Free.
That's where he is. He's always free. He's never charged. I can't believe it. So yeah, and of course, we'd love it for you to subscribe to Channel Pro Weekly. We're on all the major podcast places. We're at iTunes Podcasts, Google Play Podcasts. We're at Spotify. We're at Stitcher. If you like to watch, we are on YouTube. You can subscribe to Channel Pro Weekly there. Heck, you should probably subscribe to in both places so you can watch and or listen depending on where you are. So if you're on YouTube, hit that red subscribe button, hit the bell to get notifications, and that way you'll get new episodes in from going all the time. And you know, Rich, I didn't realize that I could have, for my museum tech pick, I could have talked about my webcam, because I actually had to pull a webcam out of the museum.
Yeah.
And set it up here because we're going virtual with a lot of events right now, and we've got people want to present. But I'm glad I didn't do a webcam pick, because you can't find a webcam for sale anywhere, because everybody like working from home and trying to set up to do video conferencing. There isn't a webcam anywhere. In fact, I could probably sell this 6-year-old one online now for $300. So anyway, my nice webcam got pilfered and sent to Mr. Michael Siggins, who deserves it because he's the boss, and the boss gets what the boss wants. So I forgot to mention that, and that would have been kind of a funny one. But anyway, that's going to wrap up 144. Thank you all so much, and we will see you all. Rich, are we doing a show next week?
No, actually. Yeah, 2 weeks.
Yeah, so we are going to be not doing a show next week because of our ChannelPro network, ChannelPro SMB Forum online event that we're doing next week, which was going to be a physical show, but we didn't really plan on doing a podcast a week, so we are going to skip next week. There's a huge backlog for you to listen to if you're new to the program, so go and listen. There's all kinds of great interviews and stuff in the past, 143 of them. It'll take you many, many, many hours to get through it. Quality entertainment at your fingertips. See you all in 2 weeks.